Carlos Ortega was 42 years old and had a life that seemed straight out of a business magazine. A penthouse in Polanco, Italian suits, 2 cell phones always vibrating, and the assistant who followed him everywhere. He ran a chain of fine dining restaurants, invested in estate routes, and appeared in conferences as a model of success. But behind the tinted glass of his truck, no one imagined the emptiness that it gnawed away. His days, it was a succession of meetings, calls, signings, impersonal. Dinners and silent early mornings in front of a glass of whiskey. His wife, Mariana, an architect and socialite, had learned to live with that absence concealed with jewelry, events and trips with no emotional return. Carlos didn't speak of the past. There was left everything behind 10 years, when chose his career about a relationship that he considered incompatible with his ambition. Melissa was part of that previous life. She never knew if she took the decision correct. He never wanted to know. But that Friday, something changed. During a meeting with the executive chef of one of his restaurants, heard a complaint about the low quality of the vegetables. Without delegating as I used to do it, Carlos decided to go personally to the rural market in Valle de Bravo. He said it was for quality control, but there was something else going on. Maybe boredom, maybe instinct. He went out without a driver. He drives same for over an hour, going through curves and mountains, getting away from his world of concrete and mirrors. When he arrived, he received the smell of wet earth, the murmur of people, the intense colors of fruits and vegetables arranged by hard-working hands. I walked between stalls without course when he saw a girl with messy braids, dirty with dirt, selling lemons with a big smile, and a mole mark on the center of the forehead that ice creamed the blood. Carlos stayed motionless. For a second, everything, the noise of the market died away. The girl, oblivious to his gaze, continued counting lemons to an old woman, felt as his heart hammered in the chest, as if suddenly something buried for years I'd come out shouting. The mark on the forehead was identical to Melissa's, a small round mole, right where they joined the eyebrows. It was impossible not to remember it. For years had been the inside joke between them. Your third eye, he used to tell him, kissing her. That girl couldn't be, or could she? Carlos came closer slowly, pretending interest in the lemons. The girl, it looked at him and smiled with disarming ease. "Will you like it, sir?" he asked. His voice was soft, and his accent had not city, only countryside and tenderness. He bought a couple of lemons, paid more than he owed, and walked away without say word. But he couldn't leave. During the next hour, Carlos walked at a prudent distance, watching how the little girl was walking the market, helped other vendors, greeted acquaintances. Finally, followed when picked up his basket and left walking through a dirt path that led out of the town. The sun was beginning to go down when he arrived at a humble house with whitewashed walls and clothes hanging out to dry. Carlos hid behind a tree. From there, saw a youngest child who came out running to greet her, and then a woman who appeared in the door with her hair collected and a flour-soaked apron. Melissa. It didn't fit doubt. Although the years you had changed the face, continued having that same way of walking, of looking towards her floor with the eyes full of thought. Carlos felt the floor trembled underfoot. His past, the one that had been buried under years of success, was there, alive, breathing, and looked straight ahead. Carlos didn't know how much time stayed there, hidden among the trees, looking at their ancient couple and the 2 children play in his patio. Melissa bent down to pick up some pots while the little girl, he ran after the smallest one, laughing out loud. It was a scene simple, almost trivial, but for him, it was like a movie in slow motion. I didn't remember the last time I had seen something so genuine, something so familiar. Carlos's mind filled with questions that tumbled over each other. Others, how was it possible? Why did Melissa never tell him? There was said anything? That child was also his. Who was he? Man who now lived with. perhaps there was completely replaced. Resentment began to emerge, mixed with a fierce curiosity. He needed to know. He couldn't return to his luxurious life with this image pasted on the chest as a dagger. If this scene touched you, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be told and continued. He returned to the city that same night, but it was no longer he same. He didn't mention anything to Mariana, his wife, and cancelled all the meetings of the day next. Instead of going to the office, he hired a private investigator. He gave him only one name, Melissa Rodriguez, Valle de Bravo. He asked her absolute discretion, and in less than a week, received the full report. Melissa lived with a man named Jose Ramirez, an elementary school teacher from town. They had been married civilly for 6 years, although they had been living together for more. They had a 5-year-old son, Emiliano, and yes, the 9-year-old girl was called Diana. There was no record, no father in his birth certificate. Carlos felt as the heir to him failed to read that last line. Logic tells you he said to wait, not to jump to conclusions. But the heart already there was sentence passed. Diana was his daughter, and he, her absent father. Carlos's impatience did not. He allowed us to wait any longer. He ordered a DNA test without informing anyone. Through a contact at a private clinic, he coordinated everything to obtain a sample, without get-up suspicions. The plan was simple. Someone would become passed by a public health volunteer offering reviews, free dental care in the primary school of the town. There, it would be enough with obtain a Diana's oral swab under medical pretext. Ethically questionable, yes. But Carlos already had crossed too many lines in his life to stop for scruples. A week later, he received the result in his desk, inside a sealed envelope, opened by itself, closed the door, and stayed in silence with the eyes fixed in. The leaf. The percentage was irrefutable, 99.97%. Diana was his biological daughter. There was no margin of error. At that moment, something broke inside him. It wasn't euphoria nor joy. It was a deepest void. 9 years away, 9 missed birthdays, 9 times in which he could not hug her. That same weekend, Carlos returned to Valle de Bravo. He didn't give notice. He didn't plan. He just arrived and stood in front of Melissa's house. He knocked the door with her heart in, the throat. When she it saw, stayed paralyzed, with the gaze fixed on his eyes as if he had seen a ghost. "I need talk to you," he said him, with a lower voice than usual. Melissa didn't answer. She just stepped aside and let pass. They sat down in the kitchen, with a jug of water warm between them. Carlos was direct. "I know that Diana is my daughter. I have the test." Melissa came down the head, shaking. He didn't try to deny anything. He just murmured, "I wanted to tell you, many times, but you were no longer the same. You had another world. I thought it would bother you, that I would be a burden." Carlos felt a mixture of anger and sadness. He had lost years that he had never could recover. Melissa dried herself the eyes with the sleeve of the sweater, visibly overwhelmed. "When I knew I was pregnant, already you had closed all the doors. You weren't answering my messages. You had left without looking back. I thought that it was better to continue alone." Carlos listened, but each word was like a stone falling to the bottom of a well, endless. "And Jose knows?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Melissa nodded slowly. "Since the beginning, I told him the truth. He accepted raise her as his own." That detail you hit. He pride. A man who was not himself there was sustained the hand of his daughter during all those years. He had taught to ride a bicycle. The eye had seen her sleeping sick. I'd listened to his bedtime stories. Carlos squeezed the fists under the table. "It's not fair," he muttered, though he didn't know. Well, who was that phrase for? Maybe for him. Same. Maybe for everyone. Did you feel anything while reading this? Then maybe it's time to follow the channel. Here, emotions matter. The conversation was interrupted when Diana entered, running to the kitchen, with the cheeks reddened by the game. "Mom, look what I found in the garden." He stopped when he saw Carlos, and greeting with charming shyness. "Hello, sir," Melissa tried smile. "Diana, he is an old friend of Mom's." Carlos could barely answer him with a gesture. Diana did it noticed with those huge, calm eyes that knew nothing of the emotional whirlwind in that table. "Do you want to see my hamster?" he asked, without filter. Carlos nodded with a smile contained. While she was leaving, running through the hallway, "Melissa," it looked again, "what you are going to do now?" Carlos didn't have a clear answer. All he knew was that he couldn't leave, not anymore. Something in his interior had awakened, an urgent need to repair the past, to claim a place in the life of that girl. Even if she didn't know, as Carlos began visiting Valle de Bravo every weekend. At first it toured with absurd pretexts that the lemons of the town were better, that I was looking for invest in products organic. But the truth was only one. I wanted to see Diana. Sometimes found in the market, others leaving the school, always maintained certain distance, respecting her silent agreement with Melissa not to disrupt her world too quickly. Jose, however, was not naive. One Saturday afternoon, he intercepted in front of the square of the people. "I know who you are," he said without raising his voice, "and I also know why you're here." Carlos looked cautiously. There was nothing intimidating about Joseph, but in his eyes there was a calm firmness. "I didn't come to take anything from anyone," Carlos said. "I just want to meet my daughter." Jose breathed deep. "She already has a dad, but he also deserves to know the truth. I'm not going to stop you, but do it. Good for her, not for you." Those words, they scored A before and afterward. Carlos started spending more time with Diana, first as Mom's friend, then with walks shorts by the people, until one day he asked, "Why are you looking at me? As if you've known me forever." Carlos didn't know. That to say, it hurt the soul of containing so much. Finally, Melissa decided, tell Diana the truth. It was an afternoon when everyone was at home. Jose stayed silently, holding his wife's hand as Melissa spoke. "Carlos is your biological father," she said bluntly. "Diana them." She looked at everyone, confused. Then she turned back to Carlos. "So why didn't you come before?" That question crossed. He tried to explain to her through tears, but Diana just stood up, hugged him, and he said, "Well, as you are here." And those words, it broke inside. If you stayed with a knot in the throat, support us. Subscribe so we can continue sharing stories, real ones that move you. After that hug, Carlos felt like his life was starting over. Diana accepted with a naturalness that disarmed all his defenses. There were no reproaches, only curiosity. He began to ask her questions about her life in the city, its restaurants, its childhood. Carlos responded with taste, but also carefully. "I didn't want the luxury and the comforts of your world," made him feel less. He adapted to the rhythm of the people, learned the school hours, became a regular customer of the local bakery. Jose, although with reservations, he allowed them to pass time together. Melissa watched everything from a certain distance, with a silent fear that this new connection could destabilize the fragile peace they had built. But what most of all, what was disturbing was what had not yet happened. What happened was that Mariana, Carlos's wife, appeared and changed everything. And it happened. Mariana arrived one Sunday without warning. She had followed the trail of her husband, his frequent escapades, vague excuses, the awkward silences, found having lunch with Diana in a restaurant of the people, laughing at something that little girl had just said. Carlos saw, standing in the entrance, and felt the world close behind him closed. Mariana, elegant as always, looked with a mixture of surprise, fury, and betrayal. "What is this?" she asked, frozen. Diana stood silent. Carlos tried to explain to him, but each word was drowned out in the strain of the moment. Mariana understood everything when she saw Melissa approaching from the kitchen. "It can't be," he muttered, giving the return. Carlos reached out from the premises, but she already was crying, drenched in rage. "You lied to me all these months, a hidden, your daughter, and that woman. He couldn't deny it, he only asked that it listen. But Mariana didn't want to words. I wanted a life that no longer existed. Mariana did not return to the Mexico City with Carlos. He took a bus back to Mexico City, refusing to share the ride with someone in who I no longer trusted. During the days following, did not attend calls, neither replied messages. Carlos returned to the empty apartment, with the echo of his failure bouncing off the walls. For the first time in years, I couldn't find comfort in their routines. The whiskey tasted bitter, the view from the picture window. It was no longer impressive. All that remained was the weight of his choices. He wanted to fix things, but Mariana wouldn't budge. A week later, she agreed to talk, with he in a discreet cafe away from acquaintances. He was visibly thinner, with deep, dark circles under her eyes. "I'm not mad that you have a daughter," she said with a firm voice. "I'm broken because you didn't trust me, because you decided to live it alone, as if I out the accessory of your life. Do you know what it feels like? That Carlos didn't have as defend themselves because it was true." Up to date next. On her way to work, Mariana had an accident, a head-on collision in the highway with a cargo truck that invaded his lane. He died in the act. The news paralyzed Carlos. He was in a meeting when received the call. He didn't say anything. He just got up and left. No one it. He saw it again in weeks. He locked himself away at home. He rejected public funerals and cancelled his entire schedule. His world, already cracked, completely collapsed. He blamed fate, Melissa, himself same. He remembered every word Mariana said to him. There was said and felt that they had killed with his decisions. In his isolation, I thought in Diana, in the little there was made, and in it much that still could lose. He cried like never. Before a taste, not for his image, not because of her marriage, but because of everything she stopped living. Mariana was his silent punishment, and his final truth. The people learned of the death of Mariana Diaz later, when Melissa saw a note in the news locals. I didn't know if I should call or write, but decided not to. He knew that Jewel would belong only to him. They passed 2 weeks before Carlos reappeared in Valle de Bravo. No one it recognized at first. He had lost weight. He dressed without elegance, and her gaze was sunken without shine. It arrived without prior notice and walked to Melissa's house like a survivor of his own story. She opened the door and was speechless. "He died because of me," she said. I don't know that do with this guilt, but neither I can keep escaping." Melissa said, invited in. Jose was in the school, Diana in painting classes. In the silence of the kitchen, Carlos burst into tears. It wasn't the controlled crying of a rich Manny, but the overflow of a boy who never learned to say sorry. Melissa said nothing. She just put a cup of coffee in front of him and sat down next to him without touch it. During the days following, Carlos stayed in his town. "I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't return to your old life." He began to get involved with the community, helping with donations, listening to farmers, paying medical debts anonymously. It became a generous ghost, someone who walked the sidewalks without seeking recognition. Diana. I visited every afternoon without fully understanding why his friend Carlos never returned to the city. Sometimes they played, sometimes they just watched the lake in silence. One day, you asked, "Are you going to stay forever?" Carlos asked her, looked and answered with a truth that finally understood. "I don't know, but I want to be with you as much as I can." That answer, sincere and without promises, it was the closest thing to love he had ever given in years. With he time, Jose began to notice that something in the family dynamics had changed. It wasn't jealousy or complaints. It was more of a feeling of giving in, a place that for years had occupied with love and dedication. Diana no longer ran first toward he upon arriving of the school. He began to ask questions about his other dad, to ask to go to the lake with Carlos, to save drawings to show him. Jose, man noble, swallowed his discomfort in silence, but one Nighty, while they had dinner in family, he said calmly, "Diana has two parents, and we are not going to compete for her darling, but she also needs stability." Carlos nodded, understanding what was not said. Melissa looked at both of them with gratitude and fear. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything blew up or I found a new balance, and it was still unclear which of the two things would happen. Was so when Carlos made a decision that surprised everyone. One Sunday afternoon, during a lunch with the community, stood up and asked the word. For many years I lived for myself. I thought that the success and the money were enough. But here I found something that cannot be bought. Belonging, feeling useful, feeling human. He took out of his jacket a document and it handed over to the municipal president. "I am donating part of my property to build a new school here, a decent school for our children, including my daughter." There was silence. Then, applause. Jose looked in silence. Melissa did with the eyes wet, and Diana, not quite understanding, clapped her hands with strength and jumped to hug him. Carlos smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't redemption, but it was a pass toward forward. One who was no longer giving alone. After the advertisement, Carlos became a beloved figure in her people, although he never looked for that place. I helped carry boxes in the market, sat in the benches to speak with the elderly, and accompanied Diana to her art classes. For the first time in his life was not the Mr. Ortega, nor the millionaire from Polanco. It was just Carlos, a man with wounds, trying to heal through it simple. However, with each passing day also it further away from the life he left behind. His businesses began to feel his absence. His team called. The partners, they demanded explanations. The press murmured, but he didn't respond. Not anymore. He was busy learning how to do bread with a neighbor baker, laughing with Diana, seeing how your cat was scared with the chickens. And in that environment of mud and clouds, Carlos found a new peace, one he never imagined he deserved. But peace has his price. One afternoon, he received an unexpected visitor. It was the Mariana's lawyer with a folder in the hand. "There are matters you must resolve," he said. Mariana, before dying, had drafted a new will. She left everything to a foundation that she same there was created to. Support women in situation of violence. Nothing for Carlos, nothing for his family. The message was clear. He forgave her, but he didn't want her legacy to be part of his life. Redemption. Carlos accepted the decision with humility. He even made an additional donation to the foundation in his name. It was his way of finally saying goodbye to her, not as a wife, but as a free woman. That night, by the lake, Diana sat beside him. "Why are you sad?" she asked. "Because sometimes you lose people because you don't know how to take care of them," he replied. Diana said, hugged me from behind. "But me, yes, you are looking after me, right?" Carlos closed. The eyes, "Yes." "To you, yes." With he. As the months passed, Carlos began to write letters. They weren't for anyone in particular, or at least that said. The left in a wooden box he built by the lake, under a tree. The eye was writing at dawn, when the fog still covered the surface of the water and everything was in silence. He talked about what he felt, what he had learned, what he still didn't understand. He talked about Mariana, Melissa, Diana. Sometimes he also wrote to himself, same as if looking for answers in his own echo. Diana it accompanied many times, without saying nothing. He just sat next to her, drawing in a notebook while he wrote. Nobody I asked about those letters, and no one the read. But in each one, Carlos left a piece of his soul, as if the lake outside the only one capable of understanding it without judgment. One day, Diana asked if he could write to him, she a letter. Carlos told her said yes, without hesitate. The girl sat down in the same stone where he used to write, and with a calligraphy trembling, she wrote, "Dear Dad, I know you weren't there at first, but I'm glad you are now. I like it when you make me laugh, when you show me strange things about your restaurants, and when you fall asleep watching movies. I don't want you to ever leave. Even though we don't live together, you're my dad, and that's enough. I love you. Diana. Carlos read that letter over and over again, as if it were a spell against him pain. Then, the saved in his pocket and did not part with it for weeks. It was the first object in his life that he didn't have price. But what about it? Anything went. Because there was his redemption, written with pencil, without resentment. Unconditional, just love. Carlos began to distance himself even more of his old life. He sold a significant portion of his shares in the company and delegated the general management to its oldest partner. Not did with resentment, but with a stranger sense of relief. It was like letting go of a heavy backpack he'd been carrying since he was young. He kept enough money so he wouldn't be a burden on anyone, but the rest allocated to causes that now you were important. Education, health, access to culture. In He People, his presence stopped being a surprise and became in part of the routine. They saw him fixing a fence, helping with the tasks of the children, or simply walking at sunset with a thermos of coffee. Some they looked with admiration, others with silent respect, but everyone knew that he was no longer a stranger, he was one of them. One day, while they took Frozen in the square, Diana said something that let in silence for a long time. When I grow up, I want to be like you, but without being sad. Carlos looked with the eyes full. That girl, with his innocent honesty, had just told him everything he needed. Listen. It was not enough just being present. It wasn't enough with repair. He had to learn to live from another place. That night, he made a decision. He would leave her town, but not to run away. I was going to do something for her, for everyone. I needed time, planning, and above all, saying goodbye. Good, it'd speak with Melissa and Jose, who, although surprised, they understood. Carlos promised to return, not as a shadow of the past, but as someone who builds. How long are you leaving? Diana asked, with sad eyes. Not much, he replied, caressing her the head. But this time I promise I'll come back. Carlos left one silent morning, without make noise, leaving a letter for Diana and another for Melissa. In Diana's he explained that he had important things to do, to make the world a better place, a bit better when she grew up, that it did not do it to get away, but to prepare him a fairer future. In Melissa's, thanked for his silent forgiveness, for not closing it the door, and through the dignity with the one who had faced everything. She was promising return, without an exact date, but with the certainty that love was no longer a debt, but a decision. He traveled for weeks through different regions of the country, visiting schools, rural, hospitals, community, orphanages. He watched, listened, learned. He discovered a Mexico that had never known, not the one with the boards in five-star hotels, but the real one, the one that bled, laughed, and withstood all the days. After a year, Carlos founded an organization dedicated to supporting forgotten communities. He put her name of your daughter in a project, Diana Foundation. Its purpose was not political or business. It was personal. It was her way of returning, of being present, even though we're far away. In every classroom built, in every library renovated, in every backpack handed out, there was a little piece of that girl who life had changed. In Valle de Bravo, life went on her course. Melissa returned to work as a seamstress. Jose was promoted in the school, and Diana kept asking about her dad, sometimes cried in silence, others laughed alone reading her letters. Every birthday, she threw a paper boat to the lake with a message. Dad, wherever you are, I hope you are happy. I know that someday you will return. And every time he did, something in the town stopped, as if everyone knew that love was still alive. 2 years passed. Carlos did not return, physically, but his actions continued to touch lives across the country. From time to time, when packages arrived for Diana, books, letters, school photos built with his name in the entrance. Them. I read out loud for Melissa and Jose, with he Same enthusiasm with which others' children they counted stories. Nothing was missing, except he. In a town, legends began to emerge. Some, they said that it had seen walking alone at dawn. Others, they swore that he sat at the bank from the lake when the fog was thick. No one had tests, but everyone felt their presence in the air. It was as if Carlos had never really left. He had just become part of the landscape. A figure that, although absent, was still protecting his daughter. From afar, one particularly cold winter, Diana became seriously ill. It was pneumonia, stronger than the kept hospitalized for weeks in the nearest town. Melissa and Jose never left his side, taking turns sleeping in a chair next to the bed. A young doctor, reviewing his file, noticed something strange. The expenses were covered in advance. And not only that, a whole medical fund was assigned to your name. Nobody understood how. Melissa did. She knew, without doubt, that Carlos had foreseen, that even without knowing that something would happen, I had thought about protect her. That night, Melissa wrote a letter. She didn't have direction, but the let in the lake. Thank you for taking care of her. I forgave you does time, but now I bless you too, because not all men they know how to disappear with dignity. You did with love. Jose, upon reading it, simply nodded. There was no more resentment, just a space emptiness that in some way was also home. Diana recovered with time, although somewhat she changed. He didn't ask about Carlos as much anymore. Instead, he started writing more letters, drawing his memories with he told his friends about the dad who helps the children of the world. His way of loving became silent, mature, as if he understood that some affections live in the absence. In the school, its teachers, they noticed his sensitivity, your curiosity about the stories of other people, and their tendency to take care of the little ones. It was as if the seed that Carlos had left she germinated in everyday activities. Melissa, meanwhile, looked grow with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Sometimes I found Diana talking to herself in front of the lake. I'm telling you what happened to me. Today, he said, and even if Carlos wasn't there, physically, it was as if every word thrown to the wind will find its destiny. One day, Diana found a box-old woman hidden among the shelves of the tool room. It was the wooden box that Carlos used to store his letters. No one knew, as there was arrived there. Inside, there was dozens of envelopes, many without recipient, others with his name written in shaky handwriting. Melissa and Jose were surprised to see her, but decided not to intervene. Diana read each letter silently, one by one, for several days. She laughed. She cried, she remained thoughtful. In one of them, Carlos said, "If someday you find this box, it means that you are ready to understand that sometimes the deepest love is the one that doesn't need a constant presence. I didn't leave out of fear. I left so as not to break what you had managed to build." That letter was a watershed. Diana the kept under his pillow, and since then, he stopped throwing little boats on the lake. He began, instead, to write his own. The years followed its course, and Diana became into a serene teenager with a firm gaze and a soft smile. She kept still the custom of sitting by the lake at sunset, no longer to wait, but to give thanks. Her letters were no longer for her father, but for herself, as if the act of writing was a way to stay connected with him and with everything he had learned. One afternoon, Melissa found ordering the papers of the wooden box. "Are you going to keep them?" he asked. Diana shook her head. With the head, "I'm going to share them. I want others, girls who don't know their fathers, know that love can take many forms." Thus was born his school project, Letters to the Wind, an initiative that invited students, children of the people, to write about their emotions, to release fears, hopes, and memories in words. The teacher, moved, presented the idea to a local NGO, and soon the project grew beyond what anyone imagined. Do you know someone who needs hear this? Send this video to him, and don't forget to subscribe. That allows us to keep creating. A journalist from an educational magazine came to interview Diana. He wanted to meet the girl behind Letters to the Wind. During the talk, he asked, "Who inspired you to do all this?" Diana thought for a moment and answered, "My dad, not the one who took me to school. School every day, but the one who taught me that you can also love from afar." The phrase went viral. The article gave the return for many editorials, and without anyone it knew, it came into the hands of a man who lived in a cabin solitary in a mountainous area in the north of the country. He recognized her name, he recognized the words, and he cried, not out of sadness, but because he had been remembered with dear despite his absence. That man was Carlos, and at that moment, he knew it was time to return. Carlos got off the mountain weeks later, without prior notice. I had his hair longer, grey beard, and an old backpack on his shoulder. He brought no gifts, no letters, no speeches. He just came, with his heart open. When arrived at the town, nobody it recognized immediately. But it was enough for him to stop in front of the lake and place a flower on a stone for a lady elderly, it would point out. That is the dad of the card girl. The news spread quickly. Melissa. He saw from the window and stayed motionless. Joseph left first, crossed the street, and without say nothing, it hugged. A hug of men who no longer owe each other anything, only respect. Then, it was Diana. She walked slowly, without running, without cry. They looked at the eyes like someone looking at someone who has been present all the time, even though he hasn't seen each other. "Hi, Dad," he said. And Carlos, for the first time in a long time, felt that everything was in your place. That night, the town hall gathered in the plaza. Carlos was invited to speak, but he only thanked. He wanted listen more than speak. Diana. He introduced himself as my dad, who travels the world helping others, and everyone applauded. From then on, Carlos never lived again. There, but yes, to visit with frequency. He stayed days, sometimes weeks. He collaborated with the school, participated in the Letters to the Wind workshops, and helped other absent parents reconnect with their children. History became example, but he always counted with humility. "I am not a hero," he said. "I'm just a man who learned too late what really matters." And that phrase, repeated among neighbors, children and visitors, became part of the soul of the people. Because in that lost corner, a man found the again path toward his daughter and towards Yassam. With he passed of the time, Charles and Diana built a relationship free of demands. They did not try to recover the wasted time, but rather enjoy the present with what there was. Sometimes cooked together, others simply they shared silences in front of the lake. Carlos counted stories of the towns she visited, and you taught as worked the project's community that had inspired. They admired each other. Melissa and Jose, for their part, found also a new balance. They never competed for the Diana's affection. They raised as a family that knew how to adapt to the unexpected. Meetings at home now included Carlos, without tension, without accounts, earrings. It was as if everyone understood that the forgiveness, when it is sincere, does not erase what is experienced, but it transforms the way it is remembered. One day, Diana turned 18 years. In his party, simple but emotional, took the word in front of everyone. "I have 3 people who raised me," he said. "A brave mother, a present father, and a dad who taught me to fly from afar. Thanks to the 3, today am who I am." Carlos couldn't help but cry, Melissa too. Jose went down the head with a smile, proud. There was no winners nor defeated, just a family that against all odds forecasts had learned to live with the absences and celebrate presences. That night, Diana told him gave Carlos a notebook full of letters. "These are the ones I never threw into the lake," he said. He it took with hands trembling and hugged as if he were hugging his 9-year-old girl years, the same one that sold lemons in a rural market and that, without knowing it, he changed life forever. The notebook became in Carlos most valuable treasure. I read on every trip, every night lonely, in each improvised hotel room where she rested after a day in remote communities. Every word written by Diana remembered that his history had not been a mistake, but a long road towards something better. He didn't forgive himself for everything, but he learned to live without carry with guilt as punishment. He used it, however, as an impulse. The story of his transformation was collected by journalists, documentary filmmakers, and even teachers, university students, but he never sought fame or tribute. It continued being that man who preferred feel in the land to listen to a child, who donated unsigned, smiling without seeking recognition. Sometimes, when someone knew, I asked him if he regretted it, he replied, I regret not having arrived earlier, but not from having arrived. At 60 years old, Carlos decided to retire from his duties in the foundation. He appointed Diana as the new director, and she accepted with the same serenity with the one that always faced the life changes. You started it with your story. I'm going to continue with many more. He said. He smiled and nodded. He stayed to live in a small ranch near the town, where he grew up chickens and farmed his own garden. On weekends, he received visits from children from the school to teach them how to sew, write, and listen the silence. Sometimes, in the midst of those slow afternoons, they were sitting by the lake, writing in leaves loose. Nobody I knew if they were new letters or scattered thoughts, but everyone knew one thing. Charles was no longer a man on the run. It was a man who had found himself right where he never imagined he would be. A foggy morning thick, like those that Diana remembered as a child, Charles did not leave his cabin. Jose, worried about not seeing him in the market as usual, went to look for him, found asleep in his armchair, with a blanket over the legs, and a leaf in his lap. It was an unsigned letter, addressed simply to my daughter. It read, If you are reading, this is because already I have left. Don't be sad. My story term in peace, and that was thanks to you. You gave me the gift of being a father when already I had forgotten how to be a man. Keep walking, keep going, helping, and never stop writing, because your words have the power to save the others, as they did with me. Jose said nothing. He called Melissa. They sat down next to her for the last time, and in silence, they fired like an old friend who had finally completed his journey. The funeral was intimate and serene. Diana requested that there be no expensive flowers, nor long speeches. He only wanted one of the first letters that he wrote, the one where he asked for an opportunity to be present. When finished reading it, the lake was covered by a soft mist, like a veil between two worlds. Diana walked up to the shore, with a small sheet folded in the hand. He placed it in a paper boat, and it let float. Thanks, Dad. This time, not for you to come back, but for you to rest. Beside him, Melissa took his hand. Joseph put his arm over the shoulders. Nobody cry out loud, because the sadness was not for what was lost, but for what was experienced with such truth. And so, the lake became the final witness to a story marked by abandonment, forgiveness, and the love that he knew how to find path with he. As the months passed, Diana transformed the ranch where Carlos had spent his last years in a meeting space for young people called the House of Letters. There, boys and girls from different places came to share their stories, write, read out loud, and heal together. Some had lost their parents, others never had them they met, but they all found in that place a way of expressing what they never could say. Diana them. I listened with the same attention that his. A father gave him there was taught, without judge, without interrupt, with he heart open. On one of the main walls hung up the phrase that most had marked, sometimes the deepest love is the one that does not need constant presence. Every time someone knew the I read, something changed in his gaze. The project grew more than he imagined. He received support from universities, Foundations International, and even former Carlos's partners, who decided to invest in the vision of his daughter. But she never allowed the essence was lost. "This is not a business," he repeated. "It is a place for truths that do not fit in the silences." Every year, the day of his father's birthday, he organized a special event in the lake. There were no bright lights, no press, only children, throwing paper boats with messages that only the water I read. Some, they said, "I miss you." Others, "I never met you, but I want to understand you." And so, with each little boat, Carlos's memory continued sailing, not as a ghost, but as a serene, loving, eternal presence. Because he who arrived late knew stay away from the better way, leaving a legacy he didn't ask for recognition, only continuity. With a time, the House of Cards was replicated in others' towns. Diana traveled through different regions of the country, sharing her experience, building local teams, inspiring teachers and community leaders. She wasn't famous, nor was looking for it, but his name increasingly appeared in articles, conferences and forums on emotional education and resilience. Many they admired for their ability to speak of abandonment without hate, of the absence without drama, of love without demands. Whenever someone you asked has managed to build something so beautiful from a story so difficult, she responded it same, "Because my dad taught me to write, it is also a way of embracing." In the end, everything I did was a way to keep talking to him, to keep that silent dialogue that began with a lemon in a market and that never broke. One afternoon, after a talk at a rural university, a student is approached with the eyes full of tears. Do you think it is possible? Forgive someone who never came back." Diana looked with sweetness. "I think so, but also I think that the forgiveness is not for him another. It is for you. You can keep walking without that stone in his heart." He gave it to her. A small piece of paper with a handwritten phrase, "Write what you couldn't do, say, then let it go. The water will know that do with it." The girl left hugging that paper as if it were carrying a treasure. Diana stared at the sky, thinking that his father would be proud, not for the recognition, nor by the projects, but because she had chosen to live without fear. Like him, I had learned that one can disappear, and even so, stay forever in the place where true love was left. Every anniversary of Carlos's departure became on an intimate, almost sacred date. Diana did not organize public acts nor ceremonies. Simply, I was walking alone to the lake at dawn, with a notebook in the hand, and sat down in the same stone where he used to write. I spoke to him in a low voice. He read some old fragments and left a new letter, written just for him. Sometimes the burned carefully, letting the smoke will take you to heaven. Others times, the released. In a paper boat, it didn't matter the ritual, but the intention, to remember it with love, without pain. Melissa and Jose, they sometimes accompanied us, but they always stayed at a distance, respecting that space that was only theirs. They knew that this bond, although inexplicable to many, that was what there was molded Diana's heart. One day, as he walked away from the lake after leaving a letter, a girl of the town reached running. "Are you the daughter of the Mr. Charles?" Diana smiled. "Yes." "Why?" The girl sank a crumpled paper boat. "I want write you something. Can I leave it too?" Diana nodded and led by the hand to the shore. There, the small wrote with crooked handwriting, "Thank you for taking care of my aunt when she was sad. She was the daughter of one of the women benefiting from the foundation." Diana hugged, and together they let go her little boat. At that moment, he understood that his father was no longer just his. He was part of something bigger, of a silent current of love and reparation that continued to touch lives. Although his history, it had ended, its echo continued to sail in every paper, in every letter, in every gesture sown in name of a man who learned, late but deeply, what it meant to be a father. To the 30 years, Diana published a book titled Letters to the Late Arivia. It wasn't an autobiography nor a novel, but a collection of stories, royal letters sent to the House of Letters. Stories of children searching for parents, of repentant parents, of grandparents raising grandchildren, of sisters who became mothers. Between each story, she included fragments of the letters that Charles sent her. There was left, as if his voice guided the journey. The book became a reference work on broken and rebuilt bonds and was translated into several languages. But what most moved those they read the tone. There was no blame or victimhood, only humanity, only love that despite everything had survived. Diana closed the book with a phrase that you had written when she had 10 years. "Don't look at me for what I was. Look at me for what I'm trying to be since I found you." And so, every time a person throws a card into the water, any part of the world where a branch of the House of Cards has blossomed, there is something of Carlos that is reborn. Nobody it calls hero, not a martyr, nor a savior. He is just a man who knew get off from the pedestal, ask for forgiveness, and build something beautiful from the ruins. In Valle de Bravo, his cabin go on standing, cared for by children of the people that they use it as a silent library. And in every corner, there is a letter waiting to be read, because true love, although arrive late, you may change everything, even after the goodbye, even when there is no more body, but memory. And every time the lake is covered in fog, someone remember, Haddad, wherever you are, I hope you are happy. I know that someday you will return. And in that moment, he already has returned. If you made it this far, help us keep going. Subscribe to the channel, comment, share. This project just keeps going. Thanks to you.